Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Advocacy Hour. I'm Malynda, the Executive Director of the New Evangelicals, and of course, I am joined by my lovely co-host, Miss Rebecca Thomas, who is our incredible board president over at TNE. Hey, Rebecca.
Hi. First off, we just want to say thank you to everyone who joined us last month for our first show. We're just so excited to be able to offer you all opportunities to give back and really act out your faith.
Yes, and if you are listening for the first time, this is a monthly show, and we are hoping to bring this to you twice a month starting in January. So just make sure you like, comment, and subscribe and rate the show, whatever the kids are doing these days for podcasts and YouTube. And we're going to continue to give you more options for advocacy. So, Rebecca, what are we focusing on this month?
Yeah, this month we are talking about homelessness. So I know for some of us, when we hear that word, we think about people sleeping on the streets, but we want to talk more about what maybe leads to that. So some of the
Mhm.
systemic barriers, economic struggles, and also mental health challenges that might be bringing people into that situation. Also just about the lack of support in general for this vulnerable population.
Which are all important things that I think people tend to forget. And I'm going to give you guys some statistics so that you understand the situation that we're talking about when it comes to homelessness. And it's rising across cities, across suburbs and rural areas, which I think people don't realize, but it's caused by quite a few factors. There's housing shortages, there's income inequality, there's mental health gaps, lack of social services. Here's some quick facts. And I found a lot of this data to be very, very astonishing because I had no idea. So the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, they released last year a statistic that 23 out of every 10,000 Americans in 2024, in the winter of 2024, were homeless on one single night. So that's about
Wow.
770,000 people. One night homelessness. That's just horrific to think about, especially just
Mhm.
the wintertime specifically. That's what really got me with that statistic. 31.6% of the homeless population identify as Black. They are the largest population of unhoused people. Families with children account for nearly 30% of the homeless population. And about 1 in 5 people experiencing homelessness are unsheltered. And that means they're either living on the streets, they are living in parks, they're living on benches, just in a place with no roof over their head. That is 1 in 5 people. So just take a minute to take those statistics in because it's really heartbreaking to hear.
Heartbreaking is exactly the word. And I think that just paints such a good picture for us as we talk about this and why this is something we need to be thinking about and figuring out how do we put our faith into action around
Mhm.
this particular subject. And one of the things I know that's important to us as Christians, as Jesus followers, is really listening to what he said to us about how we should be interacting with the people around us. So just bringing into mind Matthew 25:35 through 36 reminds us that Jesus said, "For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me." And I think, last month we talked about immigration, and that scripture is often used in that
Mhm.
context as well. But I think it is relevant here too, because we're talking about people, 1 in 5 people that are already homeless, considered part of the homeless population,
Mhm.
don't even have a habitable place to sleep at night.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think, considering that scripture and how we can put our faith into action, it's important to understand what the issue is, and then be reminded that the Bible is pretty clear about that.
Very clear. Like that's something that we don't even really have to argue about.
Yeah,
It's right there. It tells us what
exactly.
we're supposed to do. When we talk about homelessness in this country, I think that there are a lot of misconceptions when it comes to unhoused people. One of the biggest myths that I tend to hear is that people think people experiencing homelessness are either lazy or they chose that life, and I particularly take offense to that because knowing it's my community that is the highest percentage of unhoused people in this country, it disproportionately affects the Black community. And that's definitely not by accident. I think we have to look historically at the decades of redlining. We have to look at housing discrimination. We have to look at the urban renewal policies that destroyed Black neighborhoods. And I was talking to you about this earlier, Rebecca, but for example, talking about just policies that destroy Black neighborhoods, a lot of people don't know that, for example, Central Park in New York used to be Seneca Village, which was a historic Black neighborhood that got demolished in order to turn Central Park into Central Park. Now, I love Central Park. I'm not going to lie. I love it. But a lot of people don't know that that displaced an entire community of Black people. So it's things like
Right.
that that contribute to people being unhoused. But there's also, the wealth gap. There is higher eviction rates for people of color, specifically Black women. There's also the barriers of entry into housing after incarceration, which also affects people of color more than anybody else. So I just think that people need to think about a lot of these factors when it comes to homelessness. And it's not about personal failure, but it's about this impact that structural racism and inequality have. And there's a program called Housing First, which we'll link in TNE Action on TNE Connect, that provides housing first for other services, over other services. Before they give you food, before they give you anything else, they're like, let's get a roof over your head. And I think people need to know about more programs like that.
Absolutely. I think it's really important to consider that how can somebody even think about where they could get a job if they don't have a place to live? Like there's just
Yeah.
this basic need that people need to have met in order to feel safe enough to move on to the next thing that they might be trying to do.
Right. Right.
You mentioned some misconceptions, and so I want to track back just a little bit to one that you mentioned earlier about this sometimes being thought of as just a big city problem. I know in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Oakland has a pretty significant unhoused population. But even in places like Des Moines, Iowa, where I currently reside, that population is growing, and we're starting to
Mm,
see it in places like Montana and Arkansas. And you mentioned the winters. It is something we're seeing in places that actually do have colder weather, harsher weather in the
yeah.
wintertime. That's something to really be concerned about because already having nowhere to sleep and maybe a lack of food, now we're talking about actually keeping your body safe
Yeah. Yeah.
from harsh conditions. And sometimes these rural areas where we're seeing this population rise as well have fewer shelters, fewer maybe social services programs, and it can be even longer distances to get to some of the resources. So
Yeah.
I think it's important for people to understand that it isn't just happening in big cities and it isn't just people maybe living in cars. It could be multiple families trying to live in a very, very small space as well. So there are
Absolutely.
so many factors related to
Well,
this.
I think one thing I didn't even think about specifically in rural areas, like with cities, like there's way more options to get to where you need to go, right? You have
Right.
the subway, transportation, you have the buses, whatever the case may be. But in rural areas, it might not be easy to get access to shelters or to places that can offer you services. So again, these are things that people just don't typically think about. And this is honestly one of the reasons why I wanted us to do this show, so that we could give people the awareness about these topics, but also because as a faith community, I do think that we have not only the opportunity to step in and help, but we have a responsibility to step in and help. Just you reading that Bible verse, I'm like, yeah, this is so very clear based on what we say we believe in and what we're supposed to do. We have to provide support for people in need. We have to advocate for systemic change, and we should want to figure out solutions to
Mm.
stop the rising numbers of people that are unhoused.
Yeah, I love that you said we should want to. I think that's
Mm,
such an important thing. Like, if I don't want to, why? That's such a good
yeah.
question.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think that our guest today would also really be interested in hearing that answer, from people. If you're not wanting to, why? She's doing great work with in this space, working to educate communities and advocate for systemic solutions. Our guest today is named Sarah Heath, and the work that she is doing is really centered around the mission to ensure that everyone has a safe and stable place to call home. And of course, this aligns very closely with our values here at the New Evangelicals, wanting to really highlight the dignity and value of every human person, and have them have a place to live. So, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us on the Advocacy
Yeah,
Hour.
absolutely. So glad to be here, guys.
Yeah, thanks so much. There are a lot of stories and reasons as to why I know Rebecca as well, but why I got into the work that I do. I always love a good origin story. So, for you,
Sure.
what made you want to get into this type of advocacy work, specifically working with the unhoused and trying to end homelessness?
Yeah, so some people might recognize me. I've been friends with Tim for a really long time because I am the Reverend Sarah Heath. I worked as a pastor for, gosh, 18 years in a local church, 17 years in a local church, and then doing consulting and such from that. And I have always really believed that we've caused a lot of the issues. Some of the mindsets around individualization, especially within Western Christianity, has made it where we think everyone needs to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. We've lost that communal sense of being. And some of that has to do with the way that Western Christianity treats like the individual decision, me and my Jesus, that's all we need. And so I
Mm,
think as I was hearing sort of some of the things you guys mentioned, some of the misconceptions, and we can talk about even some of the misconceptions in what was shared, that when we have this call upon our life, not just to care for ourselves, but care for our neighbors. Who is my neighbor is the question I think we're all asking at a deep, deep level. After leaving ministry, leaving the local church anyway, I found myself really trying to make space for people. The joke with me is that I'm always making space literally and figuratively for people. So that includes like redesigning spaces. And more, I kept running into this conversation about particularly our unhoused neighbors in my area or people experiencing homelessness in my area. And my friend was the executive director of an organization through United Way that was working really hard and doing incredible things to try to end homelessness through convening service providers, through actually housing people through something called Welcome Home OC. But one of the things I think my superpower perhaps is communication. If you know me, I've done so many podcasts. I've spoken on a lot of stages. I love figuring out how we can use storytelling to change the world. And I think
mm,
that's the whole thing Jesus was doing. That's why parables were his jam. I think that when we use stories, it changes people's minds. So all the statistics you guys just shared, people are going to remember 10% of that. People
yeah.
don't remember when you give statistics. People don't remember. There's always a story attached, right?
Yes.
And so, kind of coming out of the work I was doing, my friend posted a job. And originally, I just sort of read it. And at the time, it was called a community engagement manager for United to End Homelessness. And I thought, I don't really know what that is, but I looked it up. And basically, you're going to be teaching data and storytelling and helping people sort of understand what the scope of homelessness looks like in our area in order to sort of really kind of activate people to actually care enough to care about policy, care enough to question the things they're being told, and even the things they're being told in churches, guys. I hate to say it, but our own
Mm,
communities give a lot of false narratives. We give a lot of
yeah.
we're the savior of the story versus like understanding, like you said, the systemic issues. Anyway, so I was looking at that and I, out of the blue, just applied. And my friend said, surely you're not actually thinking, like, really? And I was like, yeah, I love figuring out ways to communicate that change people's minds.
Mm.
And when I was a pastor, I loved speaking to youth groups and trying to explain to them their worth, whatever. Like I said, it was space making. And so what's better space than home? And I think as someone who I'm not originally from the US, and I think I've always been searching for that idea of home. And so I know what it means and how much it matters. And so I came in sort of someone who was not part of the homelessness. Like I had no idea. Like I myself, I'd been a pastor. And so and in a somewhat urban area. And so definitely I had experienced having a lot of folks who came to my church who were experiencing homelessness. But on a personal level, or even understanding all of the systemic issues, it took me, I'm going to say about 6 months just to even understand all the acronyms that are in this really hard to navigate system. And so I have been with the company now for organization for over a year, almost a year and a half. And I am now what is known as the Associate Director of Narrative Strategy and Community Engagement. And my work really is to take what we're talking about today and make it something that people are actually interested in. You said, why don't people care? I'm going to say that I think most people want to. I think what we're dealing with are people whose central nervous systems are like overactive. There's so many things to
Yep.
care about right now that it's really hard if it doesn't affect us. And
Sure.
so, yeah. And so when we talk about this and we talk about how the safety net is being kind of dismantled, we're going to find it's going to affect more and more people. And in my community, 55% of people personally know someone or who is currently experiencing housing insecurity or has experienced housing insecurity.
Mm,
And it's not just folks who rent. So where I live, 46% of people, these are all the statistics that just are in my head all the time. 46% of people rent in Orange County. That makes me feel better about myself as a current renter. 46% of people rent and 50, I forget the number of it, but over half of them have worried in the last year of eviction. So if you think
Mm,
about like in your grocery store, just you're at Trader Joe's, half of the line is concerned that next month I don't know where this rent is going to come from.
wow. Yeah.
And I so when I hear things like that, and I think this is an issue, we're really good at caring about people far away, right?
Mm,
Yes.
Man, I went to Uganda when I was in, I came out of grad school. I went to Uganda because I really cared about those folks. And it really caused me to also think, why were people so willing to give me the funds to go to Uganda when there is someone who is right
Mm.
outside my door? And
Yep.
both matter, by the way, both matter. And so I think, as I've, a little bit of that's my origin story. And just as I've continued to see how people can be activated to really care about this and move toward caring about the person in front of them. And I think in this current digital space that we're in this current environment that we're in, I think I say current environment like 17 times a day, but the current environment that we're in, means that people really have the capacity only to have their minds changed by the person in front of them. And they
mm,
only have the capacity to really care about the person in front of them. And so this is a reminder that a lot of people's housing insecurity is invisible. You mentioned the statistics for families. We know it's much higher
mm,
because most people who are experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity that have families are invisible. And by that,
mm,
I mean they are living in an RV, they're living in a car, they're doing anything they can to avoid becoming public. They might be even avoiding services. And the reason being is that they're afraid of losing the children. And that is
Yep.
something we
yeah.
hear over and over again. Or they're coming out of a domestic violence situation and they're afraid of their children being found. And so
Mm,
we're dealing with all of these numbers and statistics and realizing that that's just the tip of the iceberg. So, yes, clearly
Yeah.
it's something I really, really care about.
no,
And
yeah.
kind of the stories we tell matter.
Yeah,
I
I think one thing, sorry, Melinda, I just, as you were talking, you're like adding even more pieces to the puzzle, right? And I think it's so easy for us to, so many people are binary thinking, right? It's
yeah.
this or it's that. And if there is a homeless, like an unhoused situation, then it must be because that person is lazy, like what was said earlier. We want to have a reason, we want to have a thing we can point to. And as we're having this conversation, I'm realizing like, in any one story, there's probably 5 things that you have to point to at least to even get started in understanding
Sure.
how this person got here.
Do you know why we need to have a thing to point to, Rebecca? Because then it won't be me. If I
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
say the
Oof.
reason why someone is experiencing homelessness is because they made a error, because something they did, because maybe they had an addiction, because they chose to deal with things in a way, whatever it might be. It's if I can say it's their thing, then it's not going to hurt or harm me or the people that I
Mm,
Yep.
love because they won't make the wrong decisions. These are the stories we tell ourselves, which just
For
always
sure.
uncovers that
yeah.
fear that we have that we're only one step away from the thing that we're looking at. And so I
Mm,
think that's another reason why
Mm.
it's easier for us to send a bunch of money so someone goes across there
Yeah.
and takes care of them because they seem so far away. And then I don't have to worry that one day I'm going to need your help because what's worse than anything? I'm Canadian, so inconveniencing people. But second is asking for help, right?
Yes.
We are
True.
always afraid to be. And so I think I don't blame people sometimes for hoping that it's these things. And there is a false narrative out there, by the way. If I like to play a game when we go and I'm going to give you the answer to it. When we go and speak at events, myself and my the other person who is a community engagement manager, Alejandro, will go and we'll talk to communities. And we like to do this thing where we ask them, like, what's the number one cause of homelessness? What do you think shoots out of their mouth? If I ask you today, like, what's the number one cause? Usually it's mental health and drug
mm-hmm.
addiction. Those
Mm,
are two things that we often like to feel like are really far away from us. For me, where I do this work, that is not even in the top 3 causations.
Wow.
And so
sure.
again, what we see often like the hardest scenarios, the toughest things to see are often people who are experiencing whether that be drug addiction or mental health issues, because often they're the hardest folks to be able to get help for, right?
Yeah.
And so
Hmm.
Yeah.
they're
Yep.
um, they're the folks who are more visible. And so again, if I can separate myself from that and say, well, that's not me, I think there might be some Bible verses about that. At least I'm not that guy. It's like every now and then I'd read that verse and be like, crap, that's me. At least I'm not that guy. And I think that's kind of what we're dealing with here is like, it's easier for me to say that it was a personal decision that someone made that ended them up there. But again, as we talk more about as the safety net is being taken away, more and more we're finding folks falling into homelessness that
Mm.
really, I think, shocking to folks to see the statistics. We're talking veterans. In my
Yeah.
area, there's something called the silver wave. Um, People who are 62 and older are the fastest growing folks who are experiencing homelessness for the first time.
Mm.
So 62-year-old folks are the fastest moving in. They're calling it the silver wave or the gray wave because people
Wow.
who are in fixed incomes can't afford the current cost
Right.
of living. So the number one
Sure.
cause in my area is the cost of living, is the
Yeah.
cause of
Yeah.
homelessness.
Oh, so much good
So I'm
information
on my
there.
soapbox.
No, I
Yeah.
please
Good.
stay on your soapbox. It's important. We need to hear all these things. One of the things I do want to kind of go back to because I'm so passionate about this is you said the word storytelling, and I am really passionate about that. I did a campaign with LA Mission several years ago, specifically highlighting that, and it was called "What's Your Story?" And it was really just talking to people, trying to figure out how they got in this position and just getting to know them. And I think it humanized people a little bit, a lot of it actually, because I think people don't realize the human
Mhm.
dignity in a lot of people that are unhoused. Just in terms of those stories and some of the misconceptions that we see about the unhoused, what is something that you've learned about someone that kind of surprised you about how they got in that position?
Yeah, gosh. I think, uh, for me, I maybe because I was in ministry so long, I'm not often surprised, right?
Mm,
It is, I think, one of the things that I love so much, and Malynda, you probably appreciate this. I learned very early on, and I'm going to use some maybe crass-ish language. The church folk, we love poverty porn. Oh, we love it. We love to hear a
mm,
testimony about how I once was this and now I'm this because of Jesus. We just love it. And especially if it's like, tell us your hardest thing, because I
Mm.
want to hear that, because I want to have like a little view into your life. And sometimes that has created, I would call it unethical storytelling. Storytelling that's
Wow.
used to manipulate, storytelling that's
Right.
been used to re traumatize the
right.
person. And I saw that again and again and again growing up in church environments, going to church conferences, myself going through trauma and then publicly sharing it before it was ready to be shared. I think what has been most, I don't know, life giving, if you will, I'll use that term. Part of what I get to do is help folks who have lived experience learn to be their own storytellers. So we go through a whole process of like uncovering their story, working through like, what would your story, how can we tell your story in a way where you are the hero? Because so often donors are told they're the heroes, churches are told they're the heroes. But the truth is, the people who are willing to ask for help, to get help, and oftentimes it is not an easy system. So these are very resilient people. They're the hero and they don't even know how to articulate
Mm.
their story in that way. So I think for me, Melinda, my favorite like wow moment was this woman, and I used to do this as a consultant. I'm laughing because I wrote a book called "What's Your Story." If you're wondering why I made a face at Rebecca when
Oh.
you said "What's your story," I was like, I wrote a book called that in 2016.
I love
Which
that.
I'm at a conference called Story, and they have a big board downstairs that says "What's your story?" And I'm like, this is just following me everywhere. But so I used to consult for United Way, and I would work with folks who lived experience. And there was this incredible woman, so classy, so amazing, such a good storyteller, and she was very meticulous about how she like took notes. And they were basically, I was helping them learn to tell almost like a TED Talk style story. And so I'd worked with her, and she was going to tell her story in this public forum. It was a church, actually, a really cool church that was sort of almost like allowing people to share their story, like moth style almost. And then they were supporting the
Mm.
organizations that had helped the folks that were there. But they wanted it to be ethical storytelling, which is something I'm really super passionate about. And so I worked with this woman again, she kind of didn't reveal too much until we sort of started getting into I make him do a storyline. So we were doing that. And she shared that part of her story was that she was unhoused in Newport Beach with her children. And she was a real estate agent selling $1 million homes, now more
Mm,
than $1 million homes. Um, and no one in her community knew. It was a domestic violence situation, I believe, that had led her to this situation. But I think the shocking thing for me was she was not able to tell her community. So she had gone through this whole experience of being quite wealthy, then not being able to support her children in the way like that would have a roof over their head, but that would be able to, they were out in the community. And she said we were like sleeping in her car. You shared a little bit of her story, but eventually, they were able to get housed. And she just said, I need to give back to these orgs that helped me. And so she became part of the lived experience board. So here she is, and she's
mm,
telling her story. So it's great. She does a great job. It's fantastic. She talks about being a real estate agent, how she's still a real estate agent. She's doing this whole thing. And at the end of it, she posts it on Facebook, and she reaches out to me and she says, I had never told anyone in my life. And putting it on Facebook was an act like of bravery for me, where I am a well thought of real estate agent. Because part of the real estate vibe in Orange County is like, you can live my lifestyle. So can you imagine like you're
Right.
in a situation where you cannot even have an apartment, or, and I think she said they also stayed in hotels, but I think that was just the power of that story. And then she said from that, all of these real estate agents had reached out to her and said, what can we do? I mean, we're part of the problem, right? Because housing is so
yeah.
expensive. What can we
Right.
do?
Right.
So that's been a bit of a surprising one. So thanks for letting me
Yeah.
share a bit of her story.
No,
I would let her share hers.
I love those stories. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about your faith. Rebecca, do you want to take this
Yeah.
one?
No, you go
Go
right
for
ahead,
it.
Malynda.
Well, obviously, we're doing the show as a faith based community and organization. And one of the reasons we wanted to start this show is so people could put their faith into action. And like you
Yeah.
joke, like you're like, I think there's some Bible verses about that. I mean, exactly. There's explicit Bible verses that tell us what we are supposed to be doing specifically with this community. So, for you, as a person of faith, as a former reverend, pastor, I still don't really know the difference between reverend and pastor. Is there a difference?
There isn't one. Mm-mm.
It's just a preference. I always
Well,
wondered that.
it's
I'm discovering
we
this
can
now
go
at
into
39
it.
years old.
Minister, reverend, pastor, they all have traditional. So reverend is, the denominations that have more of a um, academic vibe. Those of us who have, so when I got my reverendship, when I got ordained, it was a little bit longer of a process and maybe a little bit more academically grueling than some folks who call themselves pastor and they
Yeah,
maybe went to Bible college. So that's
yeah.
one way to tell the difference. But when you're me, I don't care. I'm still ordained. My joke is my legal name is still Reverend Sarah Heath. So
I love it. I
there
love
it
it.
is.
Nice.
Well, how does your faith inform you in this space? Like, how does it lead you? How does it guide you? Because for me personally, just in general, advocacy is completely aligned with what Jesus told us to do, no matter what the topic is, no matter what
Yeah.
homelessness, advocating for the LGBTQ community, for anti-racist work, immigrants, like we did last month. My faith informs me to speak up on all of these issues. So specifically for you, how does your faith inform you in this space?
Yeah, I think, Rebecca again laughed because we were friends who have hung out in real life, and I can't wait to actually hang out with you in real life, Malynda. But uh, I, I've been on a journey for the last, oh gosh, it's been almost 5 years now of sort of transforming my own life and moving away from full time ministry, no longer being a professional Christian, and figuring out what was left for me, what in the embers was left for me. Um, and my faith is definitely going through a transitional period. For a while, I didn't even really identify as Christian, and sometimes I still don't. It is the tradition that I came out of. I really like Jesus. I don't love Jesus's folk, not all of them, but I do love some of Jesus's folk. And I think more and more as I look, we're in a mess. and I know you're shocked. And we don't seem to know how to like reach across the aisle and recognize the humanity of the other, right? And I think that my faith reminds me um, that there is an ability to imagine the impossible. So the story of
Mm.
Jesus
That's
for
really good.
me is about imagining, and the conference I'm at right now, they have this big sign that I took a huge picture of, or took a picture of this huge sign that says, narrate the impossible. I think
Oh,
that's my work. That was my work as a
Yes.
pastor.
mm.
That I could suggest that health and healing and wholeness is present. That I
Mm.
could suggest that you have heard it said, but I say unto you. I think for me, as I wrestle with my own faith and who Jesus means to me, I still really think the story of Jesus is no less real, even if it's not historical, because it does have power to transform people for good
Yeah.
and bad. And friends, it has done a lot of bad.
Yes.
And so, but it's also done a lot of good. And I took a class in seminary that I cannot get over, called God and Caesar, which was with Dr. Peter Story. And if you don't know who Peter Story is, Peter Story is someone who is humble and probably, yeah, one of the most humble professors I've ever had. He was the Caucasian side of Desmond Tutu. So Desmond Tutu was preaching with a white pastor, and that white pastor was Dr. Peter Story. And
Mhm.
he always centers Desmond's story, Desmond, as he calls him, Desmond's story. And I more and more saw the power of church people to do good as they
Mm.
dismantled
Mhm.
apartheid. But let's not forget that apartheid was started by church people. So it's like
Yeah.
this really hard thing for me that I am processing. I am just absolutely blessed and honored to be considered an ally. I don't always do it perfectly. But in those spaces too, we've been the damaging thing, but I've also seen incredible healing. And so for me, my faith allows me to believe in the impossible.
I
And
love
so
that.
that's how I wrestle with it. And like every day I'll wake up, I'll be like, oh crap, I'm really a Christian today. Or like, no, I decided I'm not. But I still do weddings. I do weddings and funerals, and I still get to walk with folks who still call me their pastor. And I'm like, don't do that. That's weird. But I can't seem to get away from it. And I don't know that that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
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 I
Yeah.
think that
Thanks
just
for asking.
highlights the importance of like doing that wrestling work, right? Is because there should be an outcome to some of the wrestling. And if there is no wrestling, then you're just accepting something somebody else told you. So I love that you shared that. I also really love that you talked about centering somebody else's story. You mentioned that with your professor, but I think that is part of this whole thing that you were talking about with people's stories. Because if we don't know how to center other people, and their experiences,
Hmm.
then we can't do anything about this. So we
Right.
have to get over centering ourselves and we have to start centering other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I love that.
that's not an easy ask, particularly for Christian folks who have been learned that our story, and I think our story is important. I love your neighbor as yourself requires you to love yourself, and I often think we struggle
Yes.
with loving our unhoused neighbors
Yes.
because we haven't been allowed to love ourselves. And I don't mean in that like I think about the harmful language of God can't look at me because I'm so terrible. So he provided Jesus so that I could look at Jesus and then God can look at me. So then how do I look at
Right.
my unhoused neighbor and not think that they are a person who's made terrible choices because I'm a person who has made terrible choices and cue the lighthouse music? Like it's
Yeah.
just like we have
Exactly.
so much of that to work through. And until we work through our own shame, we cannot face how to care for our neighbors in a way. Um, we have to wrestle with both. And I think as we talk about how do we care for our neighbors who are experiencing being unhoused or housing insecurity, which you mentioned, it's huge.
Yeah.
I think that we won't be able to kind of move the dial just a little bit for folks to really be engaged in caring about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so as we wrap this up, I know you have to get going, and this has been such an awesome conversation. But in that
Oh,
same
thanks,
vein
guys.
of faith, what gives you hope in this sector and the work that you're doing? What changes or momentum are you seeing? And if you could have one policy put in place like tomorrow, what would you say that would
Oh
be?
yeah. What gives me hope is that I get to meet people who have changed their own story, and
Mm.
then they
Mm.
and they reach back and change the story of others, and that is,
Yes.
I just look at me, I can't stop smiling. I just that gives me so much hope. We're doing this campaign called The Person in Front of You, which is a t-shirt designed by like it's a t-shirt to like raise awareness, and then we're doing this big event on November 15th where folks are going to like stand together, and I don't know when this is coming out, but people, if you're in the Orange County area, come to this because we're standing this huge aerial photo. But from that, I asked my friend who was the t-shirt designer from Stranger Things. He did like the devil guy. Try to pitch that, by the way, to an org. Hey, this is my friend who designed this shirt. Can he do a homelessness shirt? Anyway, so he did, and it's great. It's
It
fantastic.
is.
And I think the other thing that gives me hope is how many people are like, I'm going to show up and make that aerial shot of a house because I want to tell my neighbors that I want them to have a safe and affordable house. And I don't know what that means, and I don't know how to get there. Policy, you guys mentioned it early, but you mentioned it in a way that I think might be part of our problem, which is this idea of housing first. We are trying to not even use that language because people think that means
Mm,
housing. People think that just means housing alone, and that's never the case. There is always
correct.
services wrapped around to make sure that we aren't just, you know, putting people in a fail. You know, we're going to give you this, but we're setting
Right.
you up to fail.
Yeah,
So
that's a good point.
it
Right.
always has services wrapped around. So I don't know. It's not as sexy to say housing and services, but if we just have housing or we just have services, it doesn't work. And
Yeah.
so, how do we make
Yep.
sure that people are able to be within a safe place before they start making these changes we're talking about? And we have to understand too that every single person who has experienced, whether that's a day unhoused or a day of housing insecurity, has experienced a deep form of trauma, and that means that we are dealing with a bunch of folks who are needing to really work through some of that trauma so that they can move forward in their own lives. So,
Yeah.
thank you guys
Yeah.
for giving me this space to talk about it a little bit.
Of course.
Yeah.
Can you
Thank
let
you.
everyone know where they can follow you and the organization that you
Sure.
work with and the work that you do?
Absolutely. You can follow me at Rev Sarah Heath on all things because she's still her. And then you can follow the work that I do through United to End Homelessness, or you can actually follow the campaign itself at on Instagram in particular at The Person in Front of You, the longest Instagram tag of all time.
I love it. We will link all of that stuff. Thank you so much,
Thank
Sarah, for joining
you.
us. It's beautiful. And everyone, we will be right back after a short break.
The New Evangelicals started out as an Instagram post, and 5 years later, it's turned into a nonprofit organization committed to creating a better path forward.
We have educational content, digital media, and a really inclusive online community space. And we're really trying to help people reclaim and hold on to their faith without sacrificing any of their values.
I was looking for people who were sharing stories and being authentic as they worked through their faith in this current context.
In a world that continues to use Christ as a weapon against the marginalized, the New Evangelicals creates a space where all are welcomed and loved as and because of who they are. There's nothing more Christ-like than that.
I think the time we're in really allows TNE to show up in a way we haven't really seen before. And being an organization that talks about the intersection of faith, politics, and culture, we're really trying to build a justice-centered movement.
You know, we really had to ask, what if faith could be different? What if it wasn't about fear and control and shame, but was truly about love, justice, and compassion? And our mission is really simple. We want to empower people to reject Christian nationalism, advocate for their neighbors, and stay rooted in the things that Jesus taught.
I love that TNE celebrates curiosity.
Man, the gospel is needed now more than ever. The New Evangelicals is doing the work of spreading that gospel. And I'm so proud to be a part of the New Evangelicals doing this work.
We envision a world where Christianity isn't used as a tool for power and exclusion, but it's reclaimed as a force for good, for empathy and collective liberation and inclusivity.
Thousands of people have found us, whether it's on our Instagram or YouTube or podcasts, and they've had their journey and their feelings validated. And honestly, I'm really proud of that. We're really proud of that.
This is TNE, and we're just getting started.
All right, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to Advocacy Hour, and thank you again to our guest, Miss Sarah Heath. Remember to sign up for TNE Connect, our online platform and app where you can access TNE Action, and there you'll find all the resources, ways to get involved, and information about Sarah, the organization that she works with, and other ways to get involved with ending homelessness and helping the unhoused.
So, whether it's volunteering, donating, advocating, or simply just learning like we did here today, I know I learned some things from Sarah, and sharing that with other people, we're here to support you in that journey. So, change really does start with us. We know that. That's why we wanted to have this show. And we're already hearing things from people about how important it is, to provide resources so that we can actually be in action in our faith. So, thank you for being here with us.
Yes. And until next time, keep showing up, speaking out, and putting your faith into action. Bye, guys.
Bye bye.